Čast mi je u programu N1 Global Fokus pozdraviti Elenu Filipović, inače direktoricu Kunsthalle Basel, a ujedno i kustosicu ovogodišnjeg, pa ajmo ga sada nazvati, hrvatskog paviljona na Venecijanskom Biennalu. Elena, mnogi očekuju da pričamo na hrvatskom, but we will speak in English. Welcome to our program.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
First of all, I want to ask you, the art world has been waiting for the Biennale because of the pandemic for, year plus. We are now experiencing war in Ukraine. For you personally, how do you find this, gathering in Venice of whole art world today?
Of course, it's a very contradictory moment. It's hard to be at events and talking to people about cocktails and parties, knowing that the world is burning, that there's a very human loss, concretely a war, but also everything else that's happening on our planet right now, a kind of devastating climate crisis. The idea also of just bringing art, showing art feels complicated. And yet, I'm quite surprised at how few artworks in the Biennale somehow respond to or take consciousness of what is happening. Part of it is understandable. Art is a process. It takes time. Most of the works that were made probably before the war actually began. And yet it gives me all the more a sense of pride, I can say it, and excitement about the Croatian Pavilion, because it is a project that was conceived to be exactly responding to what is happening in the world, to be bringing attention to it, to be provoking debate about it. And this is what people are talking about in Venice. Even if they're at cocktails and parties, people are stopping me and saying, this is the pavilion, which is putting its finger on the problem.
And we will talk about that now because as I saw, not just in, reviews in art, architecture, design, magazines from Art Review, and on, but also in the news outlets. What you and the artist Tome Savića Gecana did caught very much attention. So please describe to us, because this will be broadcast Thursday evening, tomorrow at 1 p.m. You will probably say something to people who gather around this physical space of Croatian Pavilion. So basically what you and the artist Tome Savića Gecana did.
Sure. It's an unusual project. Of course, when people think of national representation at La Biennale, they think of physical pavilions, often in the Giardini. Many of the nations from the 19th century to the present have built these physical pavilions. We know also there is a Yugoslav pavilion that would have included artists from all of the ex-Yugoslavia. But because of politics and war and all the things that we are seeing now again, mean that those in power decide who gets control of, who owns the pavilion. So now it's in the hands of Serbia. Croatia then, as a result, like many other countries, because of national resources or, again, power war issues, are forced to then find alternative venues. They often rent palazzi in the city of Venice, or find alternative ways to represent themselves. In past years, Croatia has rented a palazzo and presented itself there. This year, Tome Savića Gecana's kind of genius proposition, an audacious one that I was very happy was selected, was to get rid of the physical space of the exhibition and instead to invest in local Croatian talent, to put the money, the budget, as modest as it is, in bodies, put it in humans. So there are there's a cast of 25 trained dancers from Croatia, and they are a rotating group. There is always 5 going to be in Venice, and each of these 5 wait every morning for their instructions. This is to put the project simply. Their instructions come from an artificial intelligence. That artificial intelligence has been built over the last more than a year by the incredible sort of brains in Croatia, actually, technical minds working in and around the University of Zagreb, who have worked with Tomo to conceive an algorithm, an artificial intelligence that has been trained to read the daily newspaper. It chooses randomly one newspaper from over 250 major international news sources. It picks the lead news story. It translates it with Google Translate. It processes it. It asks it a series of if-then questions. And according to this, determines a kind of score, a script for these 5 performers. Every day in the morning, around 8 a.m., they receive the information. What national pavilion to infiltrate, at what time, for how long, what parameters of movement to perform, what even to think while they're performing. So they are almost entirely controlled, as we all are with these devices that we have by these, whether it's Amazon or Google or Uber, all the ways in which these big tech is tracking us, monitoring us, selling our information, controlling us. His project speaks about this type of control, but of course it also speaks about the news, who reports on it, what they tell us, how they lie to us, different perspectives, the fact that every day a different news source is selected. So sometimes Ukraine is the lead news story, but not always. And that really depends on whose perspective the AI has randomly selected for the day.
You said at the beginning that, people approach you, congratulate you, because what you just described, is touching in the core of us today, because as we are basically, you've mentioned controlled, or, we don't even understand how much this kind of influence algorithms and AI has on our decisions in our physical space, in our real life. How important today is the art as such? We lived through pandemics, everyone was saying, it was great for the artists, they could think about the world, but some artists needed to think what will they eat because they didn't have resources. So how would you describe the current state of art and what it will need to think about for its future from these experiences that we had in the last couple of years?
I have, maybe I'm an eternal optimist, but I have great hope in the capacity of artists to translate and reflect back to us all of the situations in which we're living. But of course, artists need proper conditions to be able to do that. They need first to, have a roof over their head, to have bread in their mouth, to have the materials and the safety with which to adequately reflect on the world. But once they have that, I believe there is nothing more important than artists of all sorts, whether they're working in literature or theater or dance or the visual arts, as a capacity to give us new means to understand the world. The news, of course, tells us one story, whether it's true or not and biased or not. But artists have this particular capacity to turn it into form, to turn it into something else. And I think every society needs to be better trained to read the images that we are being thrown at, whether those images come from social media or Facebook or the news. And artists can help us to be better readers of these images.
Ooh, wow, thank you so much. And for the end, maybe to ask you about the issue of space. art, especially, you know, your kind of art needs spaces. You're the director of Kunsthalle in Basel. Biennale, what you described, has its pavilions. You know, people put art on a display, as they say. But today's world and Tome Savića Gecana's concept basically says that, you know, this space in our heads, our virtual space, the space that has an influence from the technology on us, creates this new kinds of spaces. So how would we, I don't know, reconsider a space? I have to read the art review title said about your, I don't know how to call it, concept, that it is extreme reconsideration of art making.
Indeed. You know, on the one hand, the project is audacious, innovative, because it doesn't rely on one physical exhibition space. On the other hand, it is not without space. It just infiltrates every other national pavilion. And it's important that it's not an aggressive takeover, that we carefully negotiated over half a year with more than nearly 30 other national pavilions to be able to assure ourselves that we could enter their pavilions and we could perform there. It's important to say that Tome has imagined a performance which is extremely respectful, extremely discreet. So it also goes a little bit under the radar. Some people may even be in a pavilion, not looking for the Croatian pavilion, but they happen to be in the Nordic pavilion or in the Belgian pavilion or the Swiss pavilion. Actually, today will be Switzerland. And they may be going for the Swiss pavilion, but they encounter these 5 performers moving in a slightly strange way, something between moments that look a little robotic, a little sensual, but not spectacular in any way. And they wear no costumes, they have no badges, they don't speak unless they're asked a question. And if someone asks them, what are you doing? Or what is this strange movement? And their answer is, I am the Croatian pavilion. And in that way, it's not that they are without space, it is that they have turned around the problem of La Biennale, in my perception, which is it was based on a 19th century model of the nation state and on national pavilion, national representation, in a world where we know how problematic borders are, where we know how dangerous the questions of closing off borders can be. And Tome has imagined the perfect project, which actually shows that these borders should be porous, that we can have collaborations between nations, that we can share space. And we managed to successfully do so, which is quite beautiful. And, you know, there are about 80 national pavilions in Venice. We have more than a third of them that said yes. But we also learned in the process, and nobody said no to the project. Some simply just didn't answer. And through this almost diplomatic silence, we also learned that some walls are thicker than others.
Wow, and I can suggest we can, you know, through La Biennale, do some kind of recaps of this interview, you know, seeing the reactions and seeing, you know, all those generated titles that you will have. What's the title today? Can you say it to us?
I have to check because,
okay.
as you know,
because it's interesting. You know, it depends of the, you know, how this works. It's very interesting.
Yes. So yesterday's news was from La Repubblica, an Italian newspaper, and it was specifically about a massacre in the Ukraine. Today, it's about 2 hydraulic pumps that I think have been that have broken down, and it's
very interesting. You know what you said. So, you know, on what basis algorithms work, and that people do really need to think about it, what's it's being put in front of them. And just for the end, I have to ask you just shortly, because at the beginning I said we won't be talking in Croatian. You are Elena Filipović. If it's not too personal, what's your story?
So my father was Serbian and my mother is Ecuadorian, but I was born in Los Angeles and grew up with two parents for which English was the one common language. So unfortunately, I didn't learn to speak Serbo-Croatian, but I understand quite a bit. So I understood your intro, for instance.
Great. Elena Filipović, Tome Savića Gecana, I think it's a perfect project. Good luck tomorrow at the opening. We'll be following you. And thank you so much for this talk.
Thank you. Thank you.